Maggie, said Mrs. Tulliver, calling her to her side and whispering in her ear. Go and tidy your hair. I told you not to come in without doing it first. You know I did. Tom, come out with me, whispered Maggie, pulling her brother's sleeve as she passed him. Tom followed willingly. Come upstairs with me, Tom, she whispered when they were outside the door. There's something I want to do before dinner. There's no time to play at anything before dinner, said Tom, who was not interested now in anything but his dinner. Oh, yeah, there is time for this. Do come, Tom. Tom followed Maggie upstairs into her mother's room and saw her go at once to a drawer from which she took out a large pair of scissors. What are they, Maggie? Said Tom. Maggie answered by seizing her front hair and cutting it straight across the middle of her forehead. Oh, my buttons! Maggie, you'll catch it, said Tom. You had better not cut any more off. Snip! Went the great scissors. Again, while Tom was speaking her, he couldn't help feeling it was rather good fun. Here, Tom, you might cut it behind for me, said Maggie, anxious to find the deed. You'll catch it, you know, said Tom again, and hesitating a little, he took the scissors. Never mind, hurry up, said Maggie, giving a little stamp with her foot. Her cheeks were quite red. The black hair was so thick, nothing could be more pleasing to a lad who had already enjoyed the forbidden pleasure of cutting the horse's mane. There was a strange satisfaction in making a pair of scissors cut through a mass of hair. One delightful snip and the other, and pieces of hair fell heavily on the floor, and Maggie stood her hair cut short in an uneven manner, but with a sense of freedom as if she had come out from a wood into the open plain. Oh, Maggie, said Tom, jumping round her and laughing. Oh, my buttons, look at yourself in the glass. Maggie felt an unexpected pain. She had thought beforehand chiefly of her own freedom from her annoying half and the annoying remarks about and something also of the triumph she wouldn't have over her mother and her aunts by his very bold action. She didn't want the hair to look pretty. That was out of the question. She only wanted people to think her a clever little girl and scold her. But now, when Tom began to laugh at her, it became quite a different affair. She looked in the glass, and still Tom laughed and clapped his hand. Maggie's cheek began to grow pale and her lips to tremble a little. Oh, Maggie, you will have to go down to dinner directly, said Tom. Oh, my. Don't laugh at me, Tom, said Maggie, bursting into tears and giving him a push. Now, the spitfire, said Tom. Of course, you'll look funny. You should have thought of that before. I shall go down and I can smell the dinner going in. He hurried downstairs and left poor Maggie to her misery. She could see clearly enough now that the thing was done, that it was foolish, and that she would have to hurt and think more about her hair than ever. Tom never did the same sort of foolish things as Maggie, and so it happened that, though he was much more wilful than Maggie, his mother hardly ever called him naughty. But Maggie, as she stood crying before the glass, felt it is impossible that she could go down to the dinner and endure in severe words of her aunt, while Tom and Lucy and Martha, who waited at the table, and perhaps her father and her uncles would laugh at her. For if Tom laughed at her, of course everyone else would. And if she had let her hair alone, she could have sat with Tom and Lucy and had the sweet pudding. What could she do but weep? She sat on the floor helpless and despairing among her black hair. Miss Maggie, you are at come down this moment, said Kezia, entering the room hurriedly. Gracious, what have you been doing? I never saw such a fright. Don't, Kezia, said Maggie angrily. Go away. But I tell you, you're to come down, Miss Net. Your mother says so, said Kezia, going up to Maggie and taking her by the hand to raise her from the floor. Get away, Kezia. I don't want any dinner, said Maggie, pulling her away. I shan't come. Oh, well, I can't stay. I've got to wait to dinner, said Kezia, going out again. Maggie, you little silly, said Tom, coming into the room 10 minutes after. Why don't you come and have your dinner? There's a lot of sweets, and Mother says you ought to come. What are you crying for, you little baby? Oh, it was dreadful. Tom was so hard and unconcerned. If he had been crying on the floor, Maggie would have cried too. And there was a dinner so nice, and she was so hungry, it was very bitter. But Tom was not altogether had. He did not feel like crying, and Maggie's sorrow did not spoil his enjoyment of the sweets he was looking forward to. But he went and put his head near her and said in a low, comforting voice, Won't you come then, Maggie? Shall I bring you a bit of pudding when I have had mine? Yes, said Maggie, beginning to feel a little more cheerful. Very well, said Tom, going away. But he turned again at the door and said, But you had better come. There's a fruit, and nuts. Maggie stirred and ceased, and she began to think, as Tom left her. His good nature had taken away the worst of her suffering, and nuts and pudding became to have their proper influence upon her. Slowly she rose from among her scattered hair, and slowly she made her way downstairs. Then she stood, leaning with one shoulder against the frame of dining room door, looking in through the opening. She saw Tom and Lucy with an empty chair between them, and there were the sweets on the side of the table. It was too much. She entered quietly and went towards the empty chair, but no sooner had she sat down than she felt sorrow and wished herself back again upstairs. Mrs. Tulliver gave a little scream as she saw her, and dropped the large spoon on to the dish, with serious results to the tablecloth. For Kezia had not told them why Maggie confused refused to come down, and Mrs. Tulliver had thought that it was nothing very unusual. Mrs. Tulliver's cry made all eyes turn towards the same point as her own, and Maggie's cheeks and ears began to burn, while Uncle Glegg, a kind-looking white-haired old gentleman, said, "What little girl this? Why, I don't know her. Is it some little girl you've picked up on the road, Kezia?" "Why, she has gone and cut her hair herself," said Mr. Tulliver in a low voice to Mr. Deane, laughing with much enjoyment. "Why, little miss, you have made yourself look very funny," said Uncle Pullet. "For shame," said Aunt Glegg, in her loudest, severest tone of voice. "Little girls who cut their own hair should be whipped and fed on bread and water, not come and sit down with her aunts and uncles." "Yes," said Uncle Glegg, meaning to make a joke out of this wife's cruel will. "She must be sent to prison, I think, where they will cut the rest of the hair off and make it all even." "She is an odd child, and will break her mother's heart," said Mrs. Tulliver, with tears in her ears. Maggie seemed to be listening to all this quite calmly. At first she felt very angry, and this made her brave enough to bear this laughter for a time. And Tommy thought she was felt and helped by the appearance of the pudding to bear everything. He whispered, Oh my Maggie, I told you you had catch it. He meant to be very friendly, but Maggie thought he was too laughing at her. Her poor powers of endurance broke down, and getting up from her chair, she ran to her father, hid her face on his shoulder, and burst out into loud weeping. Come, come, my child, said her father, gently putting his arm around her. Never mind, you were in the right to cut it off, it troubled you. Stop crying, father, I will take you back. Delightful words of tenderness. Maggie never forgot any of these moments when her father took her part. She kept them in her heart and thought of them long years after when everyone said that her father had done very ill by these children.